Hello and welcome to another dee'stuition video for AQA Power and Conflict Poetry. And today we'll be looking at Storm on the Island, written by Seamus Heaney. Let's get to it. So, in terms of an overview of this poem, firstly, the poem is written from the perspective of one of the islanders, and it's written in a first person present tense way, and it is an account from one of the islanders, and it really hones in on the unique experience that these islanders have. As well, the poem begins with a depiction of a really confident community who seem as if they are ready for whatever is to come their way, or whatever the storm may bring. And of course, the poem begins with "We are prepared," which really depicts that strength and that confidence. However, over the course of the poem, as the storm gains momentum, the islanders seem to lose their sense of control, and definitely their confidence dips further and further as the poem continues. Now, by the end of the poem, the islanders have been completely overwhelmed by the storm and they're extremely fearful of its presence. But as well as feeling that intense fear, they also feel a real sense of confusion, as they can't seem to figure out how they can be so fearful of something that they can't really see. And what Heaney cleverly does here is he shows that natural elements such as storms can become vicious enemies when you cannot see your enemy and you cannot prepare for it properly. It becomes a much more frightening enemy rather than, of course, like a human being enemy that you can, of course, get yourself ready and prepared for. And he really hones in on this fact that when we're thinking about natural elements of nature, we can never truly be prepared for them. Now, in terms of the context of the poem, first of all, it's set in Northern Ireland. Heaney himself was or is Irish, and during the time when this poem is set, there was civil unrest between the Protestants and the Catholics. Now, if you're not sure who the Protestants and the Catholics are, Protestants and Catholics are two separate religious groups, quite similar in terms of their ideals and their way of conducting religion, because they are both Christian groups. However, there has notoriously been much unrest, much violence, much issues between these two groups for many, many years. Now, that civil unrest between these two groups resulted in the formation of the IRA, which was the Irish Republic Army. And as a result of the Irish Republic Army, there was much violence and mainly bombings. The IRA was essentially a terrorist group, and they went about using terrorist ways of behaving in order to try and get what they wanted, which was essentially they wanted to be separate from Britain. They wanted Northern Ireland to be its own entity. As well as that part of the context, Ireland is also known for experiencing extreme weather in some of the more remote parts of the country, for instance, where this poem is set. So, as well as the violence that you've got going on, sort of politically and religiously, you've also got the fact that Ireland can experience extreme weather, such as that depicted in the poem. And finally, the first part of the title, Storm on the Island, spells out the word Stormont. Now, Stormont is the name of the Parliament building in Northern Ireland. So, again, Keane is sort of giving this nod to the idea that all of this relates back to politics and relates back to the way that the country was being run and the things that were being allowed to happen at that time. Okay, so a couple of key quotations for you to take note of are as follows. Number one, we are prepared. Now, of course, you've got that personal pronoun, so important for the we, and that really shows that the community is as one. The start of the poem gives that confident image of the community. There is this element of oneness. They are, of course, working together to fight against this storm. And then you have got the verb prepared. Now, of course, that verb gives the impression that they have taken the time out to get themselves into a really positive position so that they can weather this storm literally. And then you've got caesura after the word prepared with that colon. And what that pause or caesura does is it reinforces how sure they are. There's no doubt, there's no fear at the beginning of this poem. They know exactly what they are doing and they are happy and confident to weather this storm. Second quote then, this wizened earth has never troubled us. So of course we've got the adjective wizened, and that's really, really important because wizened can be seen in two different ways. You've got wizened in terms of something being quite old and shriveled, but you've also got wizened in terms of something being quite wise and quite sensible and quite knowledgeable. Now, this poem here is talking about the wizened earth almost in quite an insultative way, where it's talking about the earth as something that is, not very strong. It is really old, almost maybe frail and fragile. And then where it says has never troubled us, that verb troubled, it just shows that the earth is nothing to be afraid of. It's nothing that has ever given them any cause for concern. It's nothing that's ever been a problem for them before. And of course, they take that for granted. It gives them a real false sense of security and they feel that they can do whatever they want to the earth as a result of that. Quote number 3, when it blows full blast. And you've got that blast, that plosive, and that's that real reference to the civil unrest and the bombings that were happening as a result of the IRA. And it even sounds quite intimidating, that word blast. So where it talks about the storm blasting, what it's really talking about there is the storm becoming really quite frightening, becoming something that they didn't anticipate, becoming something that they weren't actually as prepared for as they might have originally thought, just as the communities within Northern Ireland were not prepared for those bombings. The community within this poem is not actually prepared for this storm. Quote number 4, spits like a tame cat turns savage. Now, of course, you've got this really powerful image here, really powerful imagery that's provided through the simile of a tame cat turned savage. Now, of course, you get this image of a cat that's really calm, really tame, perhaps seems almost pet-like. And then you've got the opposite of that, of it turning savage, of a cat becoming unpredictable, of a cat becoming very dangerous, of a cat becoming very much what nobody expected it to be. Now, if you look at something like a cat, of course, a cat is part of the cat family. Now, on the lower end of scale, you've got a kitten. On the higher end of the scale, you've got a lion. And it's really talking about that evolution of the storm. It begins really tame, the water, the wind, everything like that. It seems like it's controllable, almost like a pet. Humans believing that they can control, the outcome of these natural forces. However, it soon shows that it has evolved to a stage that is not controllable. The lion side has come out of the storm that the islanders were completely unprepared for, which is ironic, of course, because the poem begins with, "We are prepared." And finally, the quote, strange, it is a huge nothing that we fear. Now, that word strange, it's quite pensive. It seems that they're kind of taking a minute to think about what they've been through and kind of what has happened. They don't understand how they've ended up in a position where they are now frightened to be in their homes and on this island where they have begun so confident and so ready. And then, of course, you've got that oxymoron, a huge nothing that we fear. And there's still that element of arrogance there where they're calling the storm a huge nothing. Well, this huge nothing has basically completely, caused issues and problems for them and their properties. It's completely blown away all of the things that they hold dear, and yet they still call it a huge nothing. But of course, by using that adjective huge, it really just shows the magnitude of this storm and just how powerful nature can be. And it's just that reinforcing that we cannot control nature no matter how hard we try. So, in terms of takeaways from this poem, then, the first one is that the storm could be a metaphor for the civil unrest going on in Ireland during the 1960s. He really sort of captures this idea that the storm and the violence in Northern Ireland are one. The violence is something that the communities in Northern Ireland were not prepared for, just as the community within this poem was not prepared for the storm, even though it thought it had. And as well, the damage that the storm causes within this poem is synonymous with the damage that the civil unrest between the Protestants and the Catholics caused in Northern Ireland during the 1960s, and the idea that it was so frightening for people at that time. Then you've got the takeaway of man versus nature, which, to be fair, many of the poems within this power and conflict anthology have this same takeaway. And it's this idea of, can we ever really prepare for nature? Even when we feel that we have, is it a false sense of security, or can we actually prepare for it? And if you think about the natural disasters that you've heard of or you've seen, it's a question that you could really ask yourself. And finally, it's this idea that people don't learn lessons where there's lessons that should be learned. At the beginning of the poem, the islanders are so confident, overconfident, very arrogant. And even though they go through this really difficult experience, this really frightening experience, where the storm ravages their whole island, all of their homes and the things that they hold dear, by the end, they still call it a huge nothing. So they don't seem to have learnt the lesson that it's not a huge nothing, it's not nothing, it's definitely something, and that it's proven to them just what a something it is. Okay, so if you've got any questions about this poem, please drop those questions in the notes. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.